Prince William did not raise his voice when the decision was placed before him. He did something far more devastating. After reading a series of private palace letters tied directly to Prince Harry, the future king quietly approved Harry's removal from a remaining royal family role. One signature changed the atmosphere inside the palace, because this was no longer another argument between brothers. It was a line drawn through the monarchy itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stayed alone with the correspondence spread across the table, reading the final page before setting his pen down. The role under review was not a constitutional office or a place in the line of succession. It was a private royal advisory responsibility, meaning Harry had limited input on commemorations, gatherings, and legacy matters, despite living abroad. Removing it did not strip him of family identity. It stripped away one of the last channels through which he could influence shared royal history. Harry learned the decision through a private call, and for several seconds he said nothing. Then the meaning settled in. He had expected restrictions, another warning, but not this. To him, the removal felt personal, because it suggested William no longer separated their fractured relationship from his place inside the family. His disbelief turned into hurt, and the silence on the line became heavier than anger. William felt no victory. He looked back at one letter referring to earlier assurances between the brothers and realized how differently they had understood the same promise. Harry had read those words as proof that some influence would remain. The prince had understood them as temporary goodwill, never permanent authority. That difference had grown beneath every careful exchange. Then one handwritten notation changed the weight of the file. A senior palace figure had added an instruction beside an earlier letter. If another boundary was crossed, Harry's advisory position should be reconsidered. William read that line twice. This was no longer about irritation or wounded pride. Someone inside the palace had anticipated this collision long before it arrived. Charles was informed before the authorization was completed. The king did not react with anger. He lowered the page, removed his glasses, and stayed silent long enough for the aide beside him to understand that something inside those letters had cut deeper than the administrative decision itself. But to understand why William finally signed his brother out of the role, the story must move away from the paperwork and toward the two men whose childhood bond had become the monarchy's most painful unresolved wound. Long before a signature separated them, William and Harry had already been living on opposite sides of the same memory. They shared a mother, a childhood shaped by extraordinary pressure, and years in which each understood the other without explanation. Yet by the time those palace letters appeared, every shared memory carried a second meaning. To William, loyalty meant protecting the institution. To Harry, loyalty meant refusing to let the institution define the truth. William now carried more than personal frustration. As heir, his choices shaped the stability surrounding Catherine, their children, and the next generation expected to inherit the monarchy's burden. The role of heir meant the person next in line to the throne, but for him, it also meant absorbing problems before they reached his family. Harry's remaining advisory place carried a different weight. Though he had stepped away from frontline royal duties, that narrow responsibility still told him he had not vanished completely from the family's private structure. Catherine watched William reread one of the letters after dinner and saw his expression change. She asked quietly whether he had decided. The prince did not answer at first. Then he admitted that deciding what was necessary and wanting to do it were two different things. She understood immediately. This was not simply about protecting procedure. He was preparing to wound the brother he had once protected without hesitation. Harry reacted differently when Meghan told him his status was under review. Anger came first. He paced, questioned the timing, then suddenly stopped talking. Meghan waited until he finally admitted what truly frightened him. Losing the role would hurt, because the decision would come from the brother who had once promised they would face royal pressure together. She heard the anger fade into something closer to grief. Charles felt trapped between both sons. The king knew overruling William could weaken the future monarch's authority, yet allowing the removal to stand could turn years of estrangement into something permanent. Sophie soon learned the problem was even larger. A palace chronology, a timeline of private exchanges assembled to track how the dispute developed, stretched back for months. The trusted confidant realized this was not merely one explosive letter at all. It was a slow collapse, documented painfully line by line. Then one date kept appearing. Sophie noticed it beside multiple exchanges. The evening of a private Windsor memorial consultation. Charles had seen that date too, and his silence suggested he remembered exactly what had happened there. The removal may have been signed in silence, but its true beginning lay months earlier, inside a Windsor room where one conversation changed the meaning of every promise that came afterward. Every family fracture has a moment that looks ordinary until history turns back toward it. For William and Harry, that moment came during a private Windsor consultation, arranged to settle one seemingly manageable question about future family commemorations. No cameras were present. No announcement followed, yet before the meeting ended, one sentence was spoken, one boundary was challenged, and a private understanding between brothers quietly collapsed beyond repair. William had invited Harry because he still believed a narrow channel between them could survive. The consultation, a private family discussion, used to gather views before a decision, concerned future commemorations, connected to Diana, and how her memory would be handled within the family. Harry could offer personal input, but William would make the final call. As heir, he felt responsible for protecting continuity around Catherine, their children, and the monarchy's next generation. Harry heard something colder in those limits. He told William their mother's memory could not become something controlled by hierarchy, and the words landed hard. The prince stayed calm, but his jaw tightened before he answered that shared grief did not create shared authority. For Harry, that sounded like exclusion disguised as procedure. For the future king, it was the boundary he believed had to exist if cooperation was going to survive. Harry pushed his chair back before the conversation had finished. He stood while William remained seated, and neither brother reached toward the other. The silence carried years of grief, resentment, and promises remembered differently. Harry left convinced that earlier family assurances still gave him a meaningful voice. William watched him go, believing he had explained the opposite with painful clarity. Then the dispute moved on to paper. Harry sent a private letter objecting to his brother's interpretation and stating that he still considered those earlier assurances binding. The message became the first document later placed inside the review file, a formal collection of correspondence examined when his advisory status came under question. A senior palace aide added a handwritten warning beside it. If future private discussions were treated as proof of continuing authority, rather than consultation, Harry's position should be reconsidered. Months passed, but the warning remained. Another letter eventually arrived, and William recognized language that appeared to cross the exact boundary identified after Windsor. He read it twice, then asked for Harry to meet him directly. The prince understood that correspondence could no longer contain what was happening between them. This time, William would send no reply. He wanted Harry in the room, with no ambiguity left between them. What had begun as disagreement on paper was about to become something neither brother could hide behind secretaries, advisors, or carefully worded correspondence. When Harry entered the private room, William was already waiting. The disputed letters were on the table between them, but neither brother looked at the pages first. They looked at each other. Years of interviews, departures, funerals, accusations, reconciliations attempted and abandoned seemed to enter the silence with them. Then William finally spoke. His words were measured, but what they meant was brutal. The old arrangement could no longer survive. William kept his voice steady as he explained that Harry's remaining advisory role had always depended on three things: trust, confidentiality, and accepting that consultation did not mean control. The arrangement was a private family responsibility, not a constitutional office, and it allowed limited input without giving decision-making authority. For the prince, that distinction protected order. For Harry, it sounded like another reminder that his voice could be heard, but never truly carry weight. Harry pushed back immediately. He told William the role had never been administrative in his mind. It was one of the last formal links connecting him to family decisions involving Diana, their childhood, and memories neither brother had shared with anyone else. The future king listened, then pushed the letters toward him. Every attempt to preserve a private channel, he said, had created another dispute about influence. Then came the sentence Harry would not forget. "You left me no room." Harry looked down at the correspondence instead of answering. When he finally spoke, his question was quieter than William expected. Had this decision already been made before he walked into the room? The prince hesitated. That pause was enough. Harry's face changed because silence had answered what words had not. Then Harry said, Charles had privately encouraged him to believe the arrangement would continue. William froze at the implication. If the king had been reassuring both sons differently, then their father's attempts to keep peace may have made the conflict worse. Harry repeated what he believed he had been promised, while the future king began to understand that the brothers had not simply misunderstood each other. They may have been receiving different messages from the same man. William reached for the earlier Windsor letter and showed Harry the handwritten notation attached to it. The note warned that if consultation was again treated as continuing authority, his position should be reconsidered. Harry stared at the words and realized the review had not begun that morning. A paper trail had been building quietly for months. William finally said the matter could no longer be settled between brothers alone. The authority that created the role would now have to decide whether it survived. The brothers had finally said what years of distance had concealed, but the decisive question now belonged to the father, who had spent too long trying to keep both sons from forcing him to choose. Charles had survived public storms, family scandal, and decades of scrutiny, but this decision carried a different kind of danger. No constitutional crisis stood before him. No government demanded an answer. This was worse in a quieter way. One son wanted his authority respected, the other wanted proof that he still belonged. And on the king's desk rested a decision that could satisfy the institution only by deepening the wound inside his own family. Charles read the original letter that had preserved Harry's limited involvement after he stepped away from frontline royal duties. The arrangement had been a private family compromise, meaning it allowed consultation without restoring the responsibilities of a working royal. He had approved it because he believed some connection was better than complete separation. Now William carried more responsibility for long-term planning, and the monarch knew forcing him to preserve a system he no longer trusted could weaken the authority of the future king. Charles removed his glasses and placed the page flat on the desk. For several seconds, he said nothing. The king understood what each choice would cost. Protecting Harry's symbolic place could make William feel undermined. Supporting the prince could convince his younger son that even the last narrow bridge back into family life had been dismantled. Camilla watched him struggle before asking whether he intended to intervene. The queen consort did not press him, but her question forced the decision into words. Charles admitted that every intervention had only delayed the same collision. He had tried to soften disagreements, protect Harry from feeling abandoned, and reassure William that his future authority would be respected. In doing so, the monarch now realized he may have allowed both sons to hear the version of hope they most wanted. Charles finally acknowledged that he had encouraged Harry to believe reconciliation remained possible, but the king had never promised that the advisory role would continue forever. That difference was devastating. Harry had heard emotional reassurance as institutional protection, while William had understood the arrangement as temporary and conditional. Charles made his choice. He would not block William's decision. Instead, he asked that Harry remain welcome at purely personal family commemorations, while losing formal consultative standing, meaning he could attend as family without holding an official voice in planning. The distinction was narrow, but emotionally vital. Then the machinery began moving. Staff received instructions to revise private circulation lists, meeting access, and future ceremonial consultations. By morning, Harry's name would start disappearing from places where it had quietly remained for years. The decision had sounded abstract while spoken behind closed doors, but the next morning, it became real in the smallest and most unforgiving details of palace life. There was no trumpet blast announcing Harry's changed position. Instead, his name simply disappeared, a private circulation list was updated. A future consultation no longer included him. A secretary crossed one line from a briefing sheet and carried on to the next. Inside royal life, power often vanishes in exactly this way. Not with a dramatic declaration, but with the chilling efficiency of people behaving as though the previous arrangement never existed. Harry received the updated briefing schedule and noticed the absence immediately. The document listed upcoming ceremonial planning, legacy projects, and internal discussions, but his name was gone. A circulation list was simply the private distribution record showing who received sensitive royal information and invitations. Losing access meant he would no longer be consulted before certain decisions were made. Yet the instructions also stated that his place at ordinary family gatherings remained untouched. That distinction mattered on paper. Emotionally, it felt far less clean. Harry read the schedule twice before setting his phone down. Meghan followed when he walked away without speaking. She asked what had changed, and he answered with a short sentence. They had already started removing him. His anger was quieter now. What hurt was seeing the decision translated into routine, because routine made it feel permanent. William faced the same reality from the opposite side. At Windsor, he studied the revised list and found Harry's missing name almost immediately. The prince did not celebrate. Instead, he asked whether the wording clearly protected his brother's place at private family occasions. The decision had given him institutional clarity, but no emotional relief. He had wanted boundaries. He had not wanted erasure. Sophie warned him privately that the palace could control documents, not feelings. She told William that however carefully staff separated family membership from royal responsibility, Harry might experience both losses as the same rejection. The trusted confidant repeated the point, because she knew precision would mean little if his brother believed the deeper message was that he no longer belonged. Catherine pushed further. She told William that if the institutional decision was final, the personal relationship could not be left to paperwork. The princess urged him to contact Harry without advisors, aides, or prepared language between them. He refused at first. Too much had been said already. Then William found an old handwritten note from Harry among family papers later that evening. He read it once, sat in silence, and reached for his phone. The prince hesitated only briefly before making the call. The royal roll had been removed, but one relationship still remained beyond the reach of palace procedure, and William was about to test whether anything between the brothers could survive without it. There were no courtiers listening, no prepared statements on the table, and no secretary waiting to translate emotion into palace language. When William called Harry that evening, the conversation belonged only to two brothers. The roll was already gone. Nothing said now could reverse the decision. That was precisely why the call mattered. For the first time in the entire crisis, neither man was negotiating position. They were confronting what remained after position disappeared. William spoke first and made the boundary clear. The removal would not be reconsidered. The decision was final, and the advisory role, a limited private responsibility allowing consultation without formal control, was finished. He said it plainly because turning the call into another negotiation would only repeat the same cycle. Harry listened, then acknowledged that he understood. He rejected the reasoning, but he no longer pretended the position could somehow be recovered through another argument. Harry expected defensiveness. Instead, William admitted something harder. Signing the authorization had felt like repeating every moment when royal duty had pushed itself between family relationships. The prince refused to apologize for the decision because he still believed it was necessary. Yet he confessed that necessity had not made it painless. Harry heard the difference. For once, his brother was not hiding behind procedure. Harry answered with the wound he had been carrying. Losing influence had hurt, but discovering that William had prepared for the possibility of removing him long before speaking directly had hurt more. He said the secrecy made him feel disposable. The future king did not interrupt. Then he explained that he had delayed acting on the handwritten review note repeatedly because he hoped the dispute would settle without a formal break. The file Harry saw as proof of exclusion had actually become a record of hesitation. Harry went quiet before admitting his own part. Some of his letters had been deliberately forceful because he feared polite language would be ignored. He had pushed harder to make sure his concerns were heard. William had read that pressure as another attempt to claim authority. Suddenly, both brothers could see the same pattern. Each had defended himself so aggressively that the other experienced the defense as an attack. William did not offer false reconciliation, and Harry did not pretend the bitterness had vanished. They agreed on something smaller but more honest. Family contact would continue separately from royal authority. One relationship would no longer be used to negotiate the other. Then morning approached, and privacy began to disappear. For one private evening, the brothers had reclaimed the right to speak as family. But outside those walls, the world was about to reduce everything they had said to one brutal headline. By sunrise, the private distinction William and Harry had struggled to preserve was gone. The world did not see a carefully limited advisory change. It saw a brother removing a brother. Television panels called it historic. Commentators searched every public appearance for hidden clues. And outside the palace gates, strangers began arguing over a family relationship they could never fully know. One headline transformed private pain into public spectacle within hours. William saw the first wave of coverage while preparing for an engagement, and stiffened when a television commentator called the decision the final exile. The prince knew that phrase erased everything he and Harry had tried to separate the night before. A working royal role meant an official responsibility carried out on behalf of the monarchy, and Harry had lost only a narrow private advisory function, not his place as Charles's son or William's brother. Catherine reminded him that headlines could simplify the decision, but they could not rewrite the private agreement both men had reached. Harry reacted with even greater bitterness when broadcasters suggested he had been expelled from royal family life entirely. He told Meghan that the public version had turned a painful boundary into something absolute. The distinction he and William had spent hours defining had vanished in a sentence. Meghan listened as he admitted that losing the role had been difficult enough. Watching strangers describe it as total rejection made the wound feel larger. Palace staff moved quickly as speculation spread around the leaked letters. They knew confirming the contents would destroy what remained of private trust, but refusing to explain anything risked allowing increasingly dramatic claims to harden into accepted truth. The challenge was brutal. Protect the correspondence while making clear that family membership and royal authority were not the same thing. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public reaction found its defining moment. A morning newspaper was lifted above the gathering crowd with two enormous words across the front page: "Brothers divided." Tourists stopped. Royal watchers gathered around it. Cameras captured the paper passing from hand to hand, and suddenly one headline became the symbol of everything the world believed had happened between William and Harry. Charles saw the same coverage and understood that another carefully worded palace statement would not be enough. The king began preparing one final private communication for both sons, not to influence the press, but to settle what the decision actually meant inside the family. The public had already written its verdict, but the final meaning of the crisis would come from a father determined to make sure that losing a royal role did not become the same thing as losing a family forever. Charles's final message did not restore Harry's position, overturn William's authority, or pretend that years of damage could disappear in a single conversation. Instead, it drew the clearest line of the entire crisis. Harry's formal place in the private advisory structure was finished. William's decision would stand, but neither document, title, nor palace procedure would be allowed to redefine the basic truth that existed before every royal role. They were still a family. Charles sent both sons the same private message and ended conflicting interpretations. The king confirmed that William would control royal planning, while Harry's advisory role was finished and would not be reopened through correspondence. An advisory role meant a limited position allowing input without final authority. Yet he made one distinction unmistakable. Losing formal responsibility did not mean losing family belonging. Harry could still share personal commemorations and family moments when relationships allowed. William read the message beside Catherine and stayed silent. Then the prince said this was the boundary he had tried to establish from the beginning. She understood why it mattered. Charles had finally separated royal authority from emotional belonging. Catherine told him both brothers now had a chance to stop fighting over the same blurred line. Harry read the identical message with Meghan and felt the loss differently. He remained wounded and still rejected how the decision had been reached, but he no longer saw it as proof that every family door had closed. Meghan reminded him that a defined loss could be faced more honestly than an endless fear of rejection. The letters had not destroyed the brothers. They had exposed the misunderstanding beneath their conflict. Harry believed emotional belonging required some continuing voice in royal affairs. William believed that voice had to end before the relationship could survive. The future king gained authority, but no triumph. Leadership taught him something painful. Protecting an institution means drawing a boundary that wounds someone you love. Harry lost the role. William accepted the burden of removing him. Charles finally stopped using temporary compromise to hide a conflict that demanded clarity. The monarchy became institutionally clearer, yet emotionally smaller. Still, one narrow bridge remained between the brothers. Not shared power, not restored partnership, but the possibility of remaining family without pretending they still occupied the same royal world. And that became the final meaning of the letters. William had removed Harry from a royal role, but the true victory was refusing to let the crown erase the last human bond, still connecting two brothers shaped by the same loss. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.